The thunder of hooves across the Montana plains suddenly ceased as Grace Carter's prized Mustang reared with a shrill whinny, spooked by a rattlesnake coiled in the tall prairie grass. One moment she was astride her beloved horse, and the next she was airborne, her body twisting helplessly before slamming hard against the unforgiving ground, pain exploding through her lower back and left leg. It was the summer of 1878, and at 22, Grace had spent most of her life on horseback. She had never taken such a violent fall. The world spun around her as she lay motionless, afraid to test her limbs, the Montana sun beating down mercilessly against her face. Her horse, Willow, had bolted in panic, leaving her stranded miles from her family's homestead. Grace tried to move, but white-hot pain shot through her left leg, causing her to cry out. The vast emptiness of the prairie suddenly felt threatening rather than liberating. She was alone, injured, with the afternoon heat intensifying and no water within reach. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart race. Friend or foe, she couldn't tell, but out here, alone and vulnerable, every stranger posed potential danger. She tried to push herself up on her elbows but collapsed back with a whimper. A tall figure on horseback appeared on the ridge above her, silhouetted against the sky. The rider dismounted with fluid grace and approached cautiously. "Miss, are you hurt?" The man's voice was deep with a slight drawl, concern evident in his tone. Grace squinted up at him, the sun behind his broad shoulders making it difficult to see his face. "My horse threw me. I think my leg might be broken." He knelt beside her, and Grace could finally see him clearly, a young cowboy with warm hazel eyes, perhaps a few years older than herself. His face was tanned from long days under the sun, and a layer of trail dust covered his clothes, but there was a kindness in his expression that eased her immediate fears. "Name's Heath Remington," he said, carefully examining her without touching her. "Looks like you took quite a fall." "Don't move, I'll carry you home. Grace Carter," she managed through gritted teeth. "My family's homestead is about 5 miles east of here." "I know the Carters," Heath said, nodding. "Your father hired me last spring to help break those Mustangs. I work at the Thompson Ranch now, just over the ridge." He removed his bandana and dipped it in water from his canteen. "This might help with the heat while I check your injuries." The cool cloth on her forehead brought blessed relief. Heath's movements were methodical as he gently assessed her condition, his fingers never lingering inappropriately. It was clear he'd dealt with injuries before. "Your ankle's swelling something fierce, and I'm worried about your back. I need to get you to a doctor, but moving you could make things worse." His brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm going to have to be real careful." "What about my horse?" Grace asked, suddenly remembering Willow. "Once you're safe, I'll come back and find her." Horses usually don't go far after throwing a rider. Heath's reassurance was confident, and despite her pain, Grace found herself trusting him. "I'm going to make a simple stretcher to keep you still, then I'll get you up on my horse. It won't be comfortable, but it's safer than carrying you in my arms with that leg." Grace watched as Heath efficiently cut branches from a nearby cottonwood with his hunting knife, then removed his long duster coat and threaded the branches through the sleeves to create a makeshift stretcher. "This will keep your body straight until we get you to help," he explained. "I'm sorry, but this next part's going to hurt." True to his word, the pain was excruciating as Heath carefully slid her onto the improvised stretcher. Grace bit her lip to keep from screaming, tasting blood. Tears streamed down her temples, disappearing into her hair. "You're doing just fine," Heath murmured encouragingly. "Breathe through it if you can." He secured her to the stretcher with his belt and rope from his saddlebag, then attached it to his horse. With gentle precision, he led his mount at a walking pace, constantly checking on Grace, offering water and reassurance as they traveled. The journey seemed endless. Every step the horse took sent jolts of pain through Grace's body, but Heath's steady presence kept her from panic. He talked to her continuously, telling stories of his travels through the territories, his childhood in Pennsylvania, anything to keep her mind occupied. "My pa was a farrier," he explained. "Taught me everything about horses before he passed. Came out west when I was 17, looking for a new start. "How old are you now?" Grace asked, desperate for distraction from her pain. 26 last April, Heath replied. Been working ranches from Texas to Montana these past 9 years, never stayed in one place too long until I came here. He glanced back at her. Something about this country gets under your skin. Grace knew exactly what he meant. Despite the dangers and hardships, the raw beauty of Montana territory had captured her heart from the moment her family had arrived 4 years earlier. The endless sky, the rolling plains, the distant mountains, it was a harsh paradise that demanded everything from those who chose to make it home. As they approached the Carter homestead, Grace saw her father running toward them, alerted by the neighbor boy who had been checking fence lines and spotted them from a distance. "Grace." Samuel Carter reached them, his face ashen with worry. "What happened?" "Willow threw her about 5 miles west," Heath explained professionally. "Looks like a broken ankle for certain, and I'm worried about her back. She needs a doctor right away." The next few hours passed in a blur for Grace. Her father and Heath carried her inside while her mother, Martha, prepared the bedroom. The doctor was summoned from town, a journey that would take hours. Heath refused to leave until the doctor arrived, helping Grace's mother apply compresses to the swelling and offering to ride to town himself if needed. "I promised I'd find her horse," he told Samuel, "but I want to make sure she's properly looked after first." "We're in your debt, Mr. Remington," Grace's father said solemnly. "Not many men would have stopped to help." Heath shook his head. "Any decent man would have done the same, sir." The doctor finally arrived near sundown, confirming Heath's assessment: a broken ankle, severe bruising, but fortunately no spinal damage. He set the bone, leaving Grace pale and exhausted from the ordeal, but assured the family she would recover fully with proper rest. Only then did Heath prepare to leave, promising to search for Willow at first light. Grace caught his hand as he bid her goodbye. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." Heath's smile transformed his weather-worn face. "Get some rest, Miss Carter. I'll be back tomorrow with your horse." True to his word, Heath returned the next day leading Willow, who appeared contrite and unharmed. Grace watched from her window as he carefully groomed the horse in the yard, speaking to the animal in low, soothing tones that carried through the open window. Samuel Carter invited Heath to stay for supper, an invitation that became a regular occurrence in the following weeks. Heath would finish his work at the Thompson Ranch, then ride over to check on Grace's recovery, often bringing small gifts: wildflowers, a book from town, carved wooden animals that he shaped in the evenings. As summer stretched into autumn, Grace's ankle healed, but something else had taken root during her convalescence. Each visit from Heath brought a flutter to her heart that had nothing to do with her injuries. His steady presence, his quiet strength, and the gentle way he listened when she spoke made the hours fly by. One evening in late September, as Grace took her first tentative steps outside without crutches, Heath walked beside her in the garden, ready to catch her if she stumbled. "The Thompsons are sending a herd to market in Billings," he said, watching her careful progress. "They've asked me to lead the drive." Grace's heart sank. "When do you leave?" 3 days' time. "We'll be gone at least 2 weeks, maybe longer depending on the trail conditions." Heath paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I was hoping I might call on you properly when I return, with your father's permission, of course." The butterflies in Grace's stomach took flight. "I'd like that very much." Heath's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Then I have something to look forward to on the long ride home." The cattle drive stretched from 2 weeks into nearly a month due to early snowstorms in the mountains. Grace found herself watching the horizon daily, worrying about Heath facing the unpredictable autumn weather and the many dangers of the trail. When he finally returned in late October, his face was leaner, his skin windburned, but his eyes lit up at the sight of her waiting by the garden gate. After securing her father's permission, Heath began courting Grace properly, joining the family for Sunday dinners and accompanying them to church in town. Their courtship blossomed against the backdrop of Montana's dramatic seasons. Heath proved himself reliable and hardworking, earning Samuel Carter's respect by helping with the difficult winter chores and bringing his knowledge of horses to improve the family's small breeding operation. By spring, Heath had secured a permanent position as foreman at the Thompson Ranch, with a cabin of his own and prospects for advancement. On a perfect May evening, with wildflowers blanketing the prairie, he asked Grace to marry him beside the very spot where he had found her injured the previous summer. "It wasn't how I would have chosen to meet you," he admitted, holding her hands in his, "but I thank God every day that I rode over that ridge when I did." Grace's answer was unhesitating, yes. They were married in June of 1879 in the small church in town, with both the Carter family and the Thompsons in attendance. Heath had written to his only living relative, an aunt in Pennsylvania, who sent her blessings but was too frail to travel. Their first home was Heath's foreman's cabin, which Grace transformed with colorful quilts, curtains, and the small treasures she brought from her parents' home. It was modest but cozy, and more importantly, it was theirs. Life settled into the rhythm of seasons that defined existence on the frontier. Heath's days were filled with the demanding work of running the Thompson Ranch, while Grace maintained their home and began a small garden. They faced the typical challenges of frontier life: harsh winters, summer droughts, occasional illnesses, but they faced them together, their bond strengthening with each obstacle overcome. In the spring of 1880, Grace discovered she was expecting their first child. Heath's joy was tempered with concern for her well-being, knowing how isolated they were from proper medical care. He insisted on building an addition to their cabin and hired a young woman from town to help with the heavier household tasks as Grace's pregnancy progressed. Their son, Samuel Heath Remington, was born on a crisp November morning with the help of Grace's mother and the local midwife. Heath paced outside until the baby's first cry split the air, then rushed in to find Grace tired but radiant, their son cradled in her arms. "He has your eyes," Grace whispered as Heath knelt beside the bed, awestruck by the tiny, perfect features of their child. "And your spirit, I expect," Heath replied, gently touching the downy head. "God help us if he inherits both our stubbornness." Little Samuel, called Sam to avoid confusion with his grandfather, proved to be a healthy, curious child who thrived despite the harsh conditions of frontier life. Heath carved him wooden toys, and Grace sang the songs of her own childhood as she rocked him to sleep. By 1882, the Thompsons' operation had expanded significantly, and they offered Heath the opportunity to buy a parcel of land adjacent to the main ranch, 640 acres of promising grassland with a year-round creek. It was a chance to build something of their own, but it would mean years of hard work and sacrifice. "What do you think?" Heath asked Grace one evening after Sam was asleep. "It's a risk, taking on debt like this, but it could be something to pass on to our children someday." Grace thought of the exhausting work ahead, the lean years they would face, but also the pride of ownership of building a legacy. "I think we should do it," she said firmly. "I didn't marry you expecting an easy life, Heath Remington." He laughed and pulled her close. "No, you certainly didn't get that." They purchased the land, naming it Remington Ridge Ranch, and began the arduous process of establishing their own operation while Heath continued his work for the Thompsons. Grace took on additional responsibilities, managing their accounts and corresponding with suppliers while caring for Sam and their growing household. In the spring of 1883, their daughter Elizabeth Martha Remington joined the family, bringing new joy and new challenges. With 2 small children and a fledgling ranch, every day demanded more than seemed possible. But Heath and Grace worked in tandem, their partnership growing stronger despite the pressure. Heath often marveled at how a chance encounter finding Grace injured on the prairie had led to such profound changes in his life. The drifting cowboy had found his anchor, not just in a place but in a family he cherished beyond measure. As their children grew, so did their ranch. Heath's reputation for horse breeding spread throughout the territory, bringing buyers from as far as Wyoming and the Dakota Territory. Grace's organizational skills and business acumen helped transform their operation from a struggling homestead to a respected enterprise. There were setbacks, of course. The harsh winter of 1886–87, later called the Great Die-Up, devastated cattle operations throughout Montana and Wyoming. While the Remingtons fared better than many thanks to Heath's insistence on building substantial shelter and storing extra hay, they still lost nearly a quarter of their herd and faced a significant financial strain. During those bitter months, with temperatures plunging to 40 below zero and snow drifting higher than the windows, the family huddled together in their cabin, conserving firewood and sharing stories to pass the endless dark hours. Rather than breaking them, the ordeal solidified their resilience as a family. By 1890, the Remington Ridge Ranch had expanded to include not only cattle and horses, but also a small orchard that Grace had stubbornly nurtured through several harsh seasons. Their home had grown as well, with Heath adding rooms as their family and prosperity increased. 10-year-old Sam showed his father's affinity for horses and his mother's determination. 7-year-old Elizabeth Lizzie to the family revealed an unexpected talent for numbers, often helping Grace with the ranch accounts. And 5-year-old Robert, their youngest, inherited his father's quiet, observant nature along with his mother's expressive eyes. Montana achieved statehood in 1889, bringing changes that rippled through the territory turned state. More settlers arrived, towns expanded, and the isolation of frontier life gradually diminished. The railroad reached their region, making travel easier but also bringing increased competition for the cattle markets. Through all these changes, Heath and Grace's partnership remained the cornerstone of their success. They disagreed at times, Heath being more cautious about expansion while Grace pushed for innovation, but they always found their way back to common ground, stronger for having worked through their differences. On the 15th anniversary of their meeting, Heath surprised Grace by taking her back to the spot where he had found her injured. Now it was part of their own land, marked by a grove of cottonwood trees that Heath had planted to commemorate the location. "I remember being so frightened that day," Grace said, looking out over the prairie that was now familiar as her own reflection. "Not just of the injury, but of being alone, helpless." Heath nodded, his face weathered by years of sun and wind, but his eyes still holding the same warmth that had reassured her that day. "I was heading back to the Thompson place after delivering a message to the Wilkins farm. Wasn't even supposed to be riding this way, but decided to take a shortcut." Grace smiled, slipping her hand into his. "Some might call that providence." "I just call it the luckiest wrong turn I ever made," Heath replied, squeezing her hand. The years had left their mark on both of them. Grace's once auburn hair now threaded with silver, Heath's shoulders bearing the evidence of countless hours of physical labor. But time had also deepened their connection, each challenge faced together, building a foundation that could weather any storm. As the sun began to set over the rolling hills of their ranch, painting the sky in dramatic strokes of gold and crimson, Heath pulled Grace close. "Do you ever wonder how different our lives might have been if your horse hadn't thrown you that day?" Grace leaned into his embrace, watching the distant figures of their children racing home from the creek, their laughter carrying across the prairie. "I don't need to wonder," she said softly. "This life, our life, is better than anything I could have imagined." The sound of hoofbeats interrupted their moment as Sam rode toward them, his face alight with excitement. "Pa, the new foal's coming," he called. "Dancer's time has come." Heath grinned at Grace. "Duty calls, Mrs. Remington." "As it always does," she replied with an answering smile, taking his hand as they walked together toward the barn, where new life awaited another beginning in the continuing story of their shared journey. The birth of Dancer's foal, a spirited colt with a distinctive white star on his forehead, coincided with news that would once again alter the course of their lives. The Thompsons, aging and without heirs interested in ranching, offered Heath first opportunity to purchase the main ranch property adjoining their land. It was an enormous undertaking, one that would require every penny they had saved and credit extended from the bank in town. Heath and Grace spent long nights discussing the proposition, weighing the substantial risks against the potential for securing their children's future. "We've built something good here," Heath said one night as they pored over figures by lamplight. "Taking on the Thompson place would more than triple our operation. I'm not sure we can manage it." Grace studied the maps and numbers, her practical mind calculating possibilities. "It would be difficult, certainly, but Sam's almost finished with school and he's as good with the horses as you are. Lizzie has a head for business that surpasses mine. Even young Robert knows more about cattle at 8 than most grown men." Heath ran a hand through his graying hair. "It's not just the work, Grace. It's the debt. If we have another winter like '86 or if cattle prices fall again. Then we'll face it together as we've faced everything else." Grace reached across the table to take his hand. "I believe in what we've built, Heath. I believe in us." After weeks of deliberation and prayers, they made their decision. In the spring of 1893, the Remington family officially acquired the Thompson Ranch, creating one of the largest operations in the county. The transaction came with not only the land and livestock, but also the responsibility for the families who worked there: cowboys, ranch hands, and their dependents who relied on the ranch for their livelihoods. The first years of the expanded operation tested every skill and resource the family possessed. Sam, now 18, took on management of the horse breeding program, showing a natural talent that exceeded even his father's. 15-year-old Lizzie kept the books with remarkable precision, implementing new record-keeping systems that improved their efficiency. Even 12-year-old Robert found his place, displaying an uncanny ability to predict weather patterns that helped them prepare for Montana's mercurial seasons. The family's reputation for fair dealing and quality stock spread throughout the region. Heath was invited to serve on the newly formed Montana Stock Growers Association, while Grace helped establish the county's first lending library, ensuring that frontier children had access to education despite their isolation. Their success was not without challenges. The financial panic of 1893 sent ripples through the national economy that eventually reached even their remote corner of Montana. Cattle prices plummeted, and many neighboring ranches faced foreclosure. The Remingtons were forced to make difficult decisions, selling prized breeding stock, deferring planned improvements, and working longer hours than ever before to keep their expanded operation afloat. Through it all, the foundation of their marriage remained unshaken. Each evening, regardless of the day's trials, Heath and Grace would sit together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the land they had nurtured from wilderness into productivity. Those quiet moments, often wordless, renewed their strength for whatever challenges awaited. As the 19th century drew to a close, changes accelerated across Montana. The isolation that had defined frontier life gradually diminished as telegraph lines, improved roads, and eventually telephones connected once remote ranches to the wider world. The children of pioneers were leaving to attend colleges in the East, bringing back new ideas and technologies that transformed traditional ranching practices. Sam Remington returned from 2 years at an agricultural college in Colorado with innovative breeding techniques and business strategies that helped modernize their operation. Lizzie, after completing her education at a women's college in Minnesota, established the region's first rural cooperative, allowing smaller ranchers to market their cattle collectively and negotiate better prices. Young Robert, surprising everyone, developed an interest in the emerging field of veterinary medicine, apprenticing with the elderly doctor in town before announcing his intention to attend a specialized school in California. "They're building their own paths," Grace remarked to Heath as they watched their children, now adults, discussing ranch business around the dinner table. "Different from ours, but no less meaningful," Heath nodded, pride evident in his expression. "That was always the point, wasn't it? To give them roots and wings." By 1900, with the dawn of a new century, Heath and Grace Remington had transformed their once modest operation into one of the most respected ranches in Montana. They had weathered economic depressions, natural disasters, and personal setbacks, emerging stronger with each challenge overcome. Their 25th wedding anniversary was celebrated with a gathering that brought together neighbors from miles around. The Remington property, once wild prairie, now featured a sprawling ranch house, substantial barns, bunkhouses for their workers, and fenced pastures stretching to the horizon. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit around the property, Heath found Grace standing alone by the old cottonwood grove that marked the spot of their first meeting. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Remington," he said, coming to stand beside her. Grace smiled, the lines around her eyes speaking of years of laughter and occasional tears. "I was just thinking about how life turns on such small moments. If Willow hadn't been spooked by that snake, if you hadn't decided to take that shortcut home." "If I hadn't said, 'Don't move, I'll carry you home,'" Heath added with a chuckle. "Our whole life together hinged on that chance meeting." Grace turned to face her husband, reaching up to touch the silver that now dominated his once dark hair. "I used to believe it was luck, but now I think it was something more, something like destiny." Heath drew her into his arms, the gesture as natural after 25 years as it had been in the first days of their marriage. "Whatever brought us together, I thank God for it every day." They stood together as the stars appeared above the Montana plains, the sounds of celebration drifting from the main house. Their journey had not been easy. Frontier life demanded sacrifice and endurance, but they had built something lasting from that dramatic first encounter. A family, a legacy, and a love that had only deepened with each passing year. In the decades that followed, the Remington Ranch continued to thrive under the family's stewardship. Sam eventually took over the main operations, implementing modern practices while respecting the traditions his parents had established. Lizzie married the son of a neighboring rancher, combining their properties and expanding the family's influence in the region. Robert completed his veterinary training and returned to Montana, establishing a practice that served ranchers throughout the county while still contributing his expertise to the family business. Heath and Grace gradually stepped back from daily management, though they remained actively involved in the life of the ranch. They watched with satisfaction as their grandchildren learned to ride, tend cattle, and love the land as they had. In 1915, approaching their 40th wedding anniversary, Heath and Grace stood together on the rise overlooking their property. Now a small empire built from a homesteader's dream and a cowboy's determination. "Not bad for a girl who got thrown from her horse," Heath teased, his arm around Grace's waist. "And the cowboy who stopped to help her," Grace replied, leaning against his shoulder. The land stretched before them, transformed by decades of their shared vision and hard work. The wild prairie they had first encountered had become productive ranchland, yet still retained the rugged beauty that had captured their hearts all those years ago. "I've been thinking," Heath said, his voice growing serious. "We should set aside part of the property, the original homestead and that first parcel we bought. Keep it in the family, but make sure it's never developed, never changed too much from how it was when we found it." Grace nodded, understanding immediately. A reminder of where we started. "Of who we were. And what's truly important," Heath added. "Not just the land itself, but the values that building this ranch taught us: perseverance, integrity, faith in each other." That spring, they established the Remington Heritage Trust, placing 2,000 acres, including the original homestead, into a protected status that ensured it would remain undeveloped for future generations. It was their gift to their children and grandchildren, a piece of the frontier that had shaped them, preserved against the relentless tide of progress. As they entered their golden years, Heath and Grace watched the world transform around them. Automobiles replaced horses on many ranches, telephones connected remote homesteads, and electricity gradually made its way to rural Montana. Their grandchildren fought in the Great War, returned to introduce tractors and mechanical innovations to the ranch, and raised their own children with stories of the pioneers who had built their legacy. Through all these changes, the love story that began with a throne rider and a compassionate cowboy remained at the heart of the Remington family's history. It was retold at weddings and funerals, celebrated at anniversaries, and passed down as the foundation myth of a family that had grown from 2 people to dozens spread across Montana and beyond. In 1928, at the age of 76, Heath Remington passed away peacefully in the ranch house he had expanded from a simple cabin to a comfortable home. Grace, holding his hand until the end, found solace in the 50 years they had shared and the legacy they had built together. She lived another 5 years, remaining active in the community and ranch affairs until her final days. When she joined Heath in 1933, the Remington family gathered from across the country to lay her to rest beside him in the small cemetery overlooking the ranch. On her tombstone, beneath the dates marking her long and productive life, the family inscribed words that captured the essence of the love story that had built a dynasty. Her horse reared and threw her hard. A cowboy stopped and said, "Don't move, I'll carry you home." And so began a journey of 50 years, carrying each other home through every trial and triumph. The Remington Ranch survived the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, adapted through world wars and changing economies, and remained in the family through the 20th century and beyond. But through all the changes and challenges, the family never forgot its origins, a chance encounter on the Montana prairie where love and courage laid the foundation for generations to come. To this day, Remington descendants bring their children to the cottonwood grove that marks the spot where Heath found Grace. There they tell the story of the injured rider and the kind cowboy, of hard work and perseverance, and of a love that transformed not just 2 lives but an entire landscape, creating a legacy that continues to shape their family's values and vision. And in the whisper of the prairie grasses and the rustle of cottonwood leaves, those who listen closely might almost hear the echo of those first words that changed everything. "Don't move, I'll carry you home."